Okay, so I'm going to give a very brief introduction to Kin+Carta. Some of you may have heard or seen this already. Can you all see my screen? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So, so welcome to the final session, called Untapped and Kin+Carta Create. I'm Andre Hitchman and I'm an Android developer at Kin+Carta. Just going to go through a few things, housekeeping, and then a brief introduction to Kin+Carta, and then we'll go straight into the session. So just a reminder, please, while the main speaker is speaking, please mute yourselves to avoid any disruptions. If you do have any questions or queries, feel free to drop them in the chat or use the raise hand feature, and we will respond to you and allow you to speak. There will be many opportunities to ask lots of questions throughout the session as well. So who are Kin+Carta Create? We call ourselves the digital transformation partner for the real world. So we exist to make the world work better. And we're part of a digital services connective. So we have about 1,500 digital experts spread across the globe, and we provide end-to-end services for our clients. To date, we've worked with loads of different range of clients from all different types of industries. This is just a small number of them that you can see on this slide. Some more familiar to you, maybe Tesco, M&S. You may have seen this new one called Kazoo, and B&Q. So what we do, as Jason mentioned before, is we partner with these organizations to help build their technology solutions. So this can range from everything from mobile apps, websites, full backend systems, fully integrated. We help them build them out. So a couple of examples I just want to quickly show you that we've done in the past fairly recently. The first one is the Railcard app. You may be familiar with this. Traditionally, with rail cards, you get a physical card. It has your picture, and you use them to get discounts on the National Rail Service here in the UK. And what we did is we partnered with them, and we built a digital solution to that. So now you can get your rail card in a digital form through the app, and use that instead of the paper version that you get. This is one of the digital transformation partnerships that we had. Another one is with Tesco. So we actually helped Tesco rebuild their app for their grocery shopping experience. So as you can see on the screen, this is what it looks like. And we spent a good couple of years helping them rebuild it from scratch using a bunch of technologies. We built this for Android and iOS, and we also made it accessible. So with a company such as Tesco, who touched the breadth of UK, you have to think even broader. So you have to think about people who have motor neuron disease or blind. So you have to kind of think about how can you make an app that caters to those people. So we partnered with them to build a solution for that. And we're very proud of this Tesco grocery shopping app that we helped build them with. So how do we do this? We're a people company. So everything we do is with our people. And these people range from different disciplines, from engineering, designers, and product. So we have in-house team of Android developers, testers, iOS developers, backend and front-end developers. We also have visual designers, UI and UX, and we also have a range of product people, everyone from agile delivery to product owners to sales and strategists. And that is how we work. We work in-house and we partner with these organizations. So that's a brief introduction to Kin+Carta. I'm going to pass the time now to Jermaine, who's going to lead the session today.
All right, guys. Well, welcome to this final workshop. We're going to be essentially bringing everything we've learned together in the first two workshops to put together a Flutter application. Just a little bit about me. My name is Jermaine. I've been a developer for a couple of years, front-end on the most part. I've dabbled a bit in back-end and the DevOps side of things. Nowadays, for the most part, I make tutorials on YouTube teaching devs to be productive building full-stack apps using Dart and Flutter. Here's the agenda for today. And I'm going to give a brief summary of what we covered in last workshop. And from that, I'll take some time and introduce the app we're going to be building. After that, we will spend some time just developing the skeleton for our apps. So that's just the main building blocks that would formulate or help formulate the whole app. From that, we'll come back to the slides and take some time looking at synchronous versus asynchronous programming and getting to understand the differences between the two. From what we learn in those slides, we're gonna come back to the code, and after learning a bit about the API we're gonna be working with, we will be interacting with that using a package, a Flutter package. More on that later. From that, we will look at state management. So this will be an expansion of what we learned in the last workshop. And then lastly, we'll just deploy what we've built to our mobile device and have some Q&A at the end. I've pasted a link in the chat to everyone. So that's a link to the workshop notes. So you could look at that. It's got solutions for the exercises and some other notes on the API that we're going to be working with. Right, so last time we covered state management in a Flutter application. So Roberta took us through understanding exactly what state is. And this is the definition that we worked with. So a system is described as stateful if it's designed to remember preceding events or user interactions. The remembered information is called the state of the system. So state is essentially a representation of a piece of data at a particular point in time. We went through two examples of that. So with this example, we looked at a light switch, and the idea here is that state comes there are two categories of state. There is fixed state, which are the bits of state that doesn't change. So for instance, with this light switch, we know it's always going to be white and we know it's always going to be square. And the variable state refers to properties of this light switch that are bound to change. So the switch position in this instance, which is either on or off. We got a secondary example here with this Ferrari. Also, the fixed aspect of this Ferrari is that it's always going to be a Ferrari, it's always going to be red, and it's a four-wheel drive. And the variable state, the properties that are bound to change, is whether the car is moving or stationary, whether the vehicle is on or off, bonnet open, closed, headlights on, off, tail lights, so on and so forth. And from there, we got to this solution. And this solution is a traffic light system. So the idea is you click the press the cross button, and then after a couple of seconds, the traffic light will change from green to red, at which point also the pedestrian light will change from red to green. After a couple of seconds, it will just revert backwards to the way it was. And there's a link here that I'll share with you guys later on. If you need it, just let me know. And from here, we are going to talk about the actual app So the app is going to be a HTTP-based application. We are going to be pulling down a list of programs from online. So this is based on the ITV list of programs. So we'll build this app, we just call it favorite shows. And the idea here is we'll pull down information from ITV and then we'll display on the screen. But also there are some user interactions that we'll be implementing. Each of these programs has a heart at the top right of it. So you can press on that and that would highlight red. That means that you selected it as a favorite. And if you press it again, it'll deselect it, it'll unfavorite it. For each card that we select to make a favorite, at the very top right, there is a number or a counter that would update to give you an indication of the amount of programs that you've selected to be your favorite. And from here on out, let's do some coding. All right. So I've got my terminal open here. I'm in a directory, I just called it code Untapped. We're gonna go ahead and create a Flutter project. And also you can also use Dartpad if for some reason you don't have Flutter set up. So if you go to dartpad.dev, I'll just show you guys briefly.
I'm sorry, Jermaine. Would you be able to share the link again in the chat, please, to the worksheet or solutions?
Yep, sure.
Thank you.
So there's the link. If you come to dartpad.dev and you select the counter example, it'll bring you to this bit. And I can share this in the chat as well. So that's dartpad.dev. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a new Flutter project. The command to create that would be Flutter create, and then the name of your project, I'll just call it Fave Shows. So what will happen is it will create a folder, generate the relevant files and folders. It will also run Flutter pub-get to update our dependencies. And it will go ahead and do some extra checks. And once it's done, we're just going to seed into that. And I'll just open that in via. Okay, so once that I've opened it, I'm going to run this project. Here by pressing F5, or if you're using the terminal, you can just type Flutter run. That'll also go ahead and run this project. And while this is launching, I'm just gonna.
Wayne, do you want to just really go through starting the emulator?
Yeah.
Studio, just quickly, 2 seconds.
Sure. So there are two ways you can start your emulator. One with Android Studio. So if you've got Android Studio opened, you can go into AVD Manager. So if we go to Tools, AVD Manager, and then you select the emulator you want to run, and then you click this Run button. Also, alternatively, if you've got VS Code and you have the Dart and Flutter extensions installed, you can also run it from VS Code as well as the option here. So you can hit that and then select which emulator you want to spin up. And that will also spin up the relevant emulator. You can also run iOS simulator by, if you open Xcode, and then you hit Xcode and you go to Open Developer Tool and you select Simulator. That also opens the simulator for iOS. I'm just gonna quit Xcode because I don't need that. All right, so we have our example running. And this basic app consists of two types of widgets. So there's a stateless widget and a stateful widget. These are the main categories of widgets you essentially get when building Flutter applications. A stateless widget essentially just takes in data and it passes that data down to a tree of widgets and it just renders it on the screen. It doesn't take any stateful information at all. We have a stateful widget which takes stateful information. However, this stateful widget comes in two parts. So the first part is the stateful widget class. The idea behind this class is it will take in configuration information, which you're then able to access via the actual state object that this class would create. So that brings me to the second part, which is the state object. This is where you would render your widgets to the screen, and also this is where you have stateful properties that you update. So to help get your head around the difference between the two, the idea with stateful widget is this is essentially where you would store your fixed state information. So like the red Ferrari and the white light switch. And here is where you would have your variable information. So details that are bound to change. Here we've got an example with counter, but back to the Ferrari example, it could be the engine state, the state of the bonnet, and so on and so forth. I'm going to just delete these comments on my side so the code is much lighter. You can go ahead and do the same if you want. Okay. Okay, so in this example, yeah, it just gives us the basic boilerplate example. We've got this button whereby when we click it, a stateful update takes place. This set state function runs, which will update the counter value here, which will go ahead and rebuild this widget tree. But I don't want to spend too much time talking about this. So let's delete some of this code. I'll start by removing this floating action button. From here, I will also get rid of this increment counter function. In fact, I'll get rid of this one as well. And then I will delete this bit, essentially. And then before we go ahead, I'll just talk a bit about the widgets here. So we are using a scaffold widget because a scaffold widget is the child that is defined for a material app. So scaffold widget allows us to implement the material design visual layout structure. So this consists of an app bar, which is the blue bit at the top. We've got the body, which is this white bit. We've got the floating action button. We can also implement a drawer, a panel that slides in from the left, and so on and so forth. For our use case, we only care about the app bar and the body. There is that debug banner at the top right, which I'm gonna get rid of. So if we come to our material app widget and then we type debug show checked mode banner, just set it to false and it will get rid of it. get rid of that banner. So at this point, we're going to start by building the counter widget that appears here at the top right. In order to do that, we need to modify our app bar. So this app bar takes in a title, but also it takes in a list of actions. And this action allows us to define a list of widgets that the user can interact with. So just think of a toolbar, for instance. So for our use case, what we just need to do is to define our counter section. So I will start by creating an icon. And this icon will be of type favorite. If I save that, yeah, we see a heart appear over here. Let's specify the size of this icon. We'll just set it to 25 to make it slightly bigger. And then next, what we need to do is to also define our text. So this will be our counter. All right, for now, we'll just set it to 0. And this text will take in some styles. So in order to define a style, we'll define the text style object, and we can just pass in our styles here. So we just need to set the color, and we'll set it to white. We'll do colors.white. Okay, so that appears over here. We will give it a font size of 20. And then also we will give it a font weight of bold. Okay. So at this point, you can see that it's not aligned properly. And also with these actions, because we're treating both of these as a singular component, it doesn't make sense to define them separately like that. So what I'm going to do is we're going to put both of these in a row widget. And what a row allows us to do is align widgets along the x-axis. And also will give us a bit more control on the positioning of the widgets. So I'll create a row widget over here that takes in children. And then I will cut these two and then go ahead and paste them in here. So that is now aligned the way we expect it to. Also, we could add a bit of spacing between the widgets, and we can use a sized box widget for that. So what essentially a sized box does is it allows us to specify a set of dimensions that would be applied to each child widget we pass in. In this use case, we're not going to pass in a child widget, we'll just set a width for it because we just want to use it as white space essentially. And let me do that here as well. Okay, so that looks good. Okay, so from here on out, we can move on to the body. area. And what we're going to be creating here is the card widget that will be showing for each of the programs. So just to give you an idea, I've got it up here. On that pad, if you click on the first link, it will bring you to this dartpad example. So we're going to be building this widget over here. So it consists of a card, it's got the material design effects as well, and it's got some basic state management happening there. Okay, so to do that, I am going to get rid of this column bit. And instead of using this column, we need a list view widget to allow us to scroll through the programs. So I'll just create a list view widget as such. This takes in a list of children, and we can define our widget. So we'll start with a card widget. This would render a material design card onto the screen. So if I save that, and let's pass in a child. And let's see what that looks like on the screen. Okay, so we got this program showing up here. Let's give it a color so we can see it properly. Okay, so there we go. Okay, so next let's go ahead and amend the child a bit so we can create another widget for this child. And what we want is the inkwell widget. So this widget allows us to essentially have the material ripple effect that I showed you earlier on. This takes in a tap event. For now, we're not going to do anything with it yet. And then we'll specify a child for this. And for this child, we will set a container widget for this inkwell. And this container will take in a height of 200. So it should look like that. In this container, we will specify a child widget. And in this child widget, we're going to be rendering our image and the other bits of our program. But before we do that, if you remember from the previous sessions, in order to align items on the x-axis, we use the row widget. And to align items on the y-axis, we use the column widget. So for this one, we need to align items on the z-axis because we've got the image and then the titles overlaying it. And that's where the stack widget comes in. And this stack widget takes in a list of children. So for our first child widget, we will set a positioned widget. So what positioned does is it allows us to add widgets and also set the coordinates of that widget. So if I give a brief example of that. Let's say we've got positioned. I set the child to this text, program title. If I save that, that gives us that. We can also set the coordinates of that. So I can set the left to 18, which will shift it a bit to the left. We can also set the top as well, if we want, and so on and so forth. So in the example, we didn't set the top. We set the position from the bottom. And that position was 18. Also for our child, we set some styles for it as well. And this takes in a text style object. In this text style, we need to specify the color. So we'll give that white. Also, we'll set the font size to 20. And then next, we will set the font weight to be bold. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, so that gives us that.
Jermaine, you're getting pretty fast there, Jermaine. We're having to type quite quickly to keep up. How's everybody doing in the session? I just want to make sure that everybody's keeping up with Jermaine there, because he can type quite fast. Do we need to pause 5 minutes so that you can catch up, or is everybody looking?
Yeah, I can also take questions.
I'm just following at this stage, to be honest. I'm fine.
Okay.
All right, cool. Everybody looks good. So carry on, Jermaine.
Okay. I'll slow down a bit more then.
Yeah.
Okay, so at this point, we have our program title showing on the screen. Let's go ahead and implement the other bits. So we've got our image. And I'm going to use a positioned widget for that. By this time, it's a special type of position widget, position.fill. And what that does is it sets the whole coordinates left, bottom, top, right to 0, because we want the image to populate the full card. So let's specify a child for it. And in fact, let's see if our material effect is working. Okay, so at this point, our material effect should be working for us. We can specify, we can render an image by using the image widget. But in this scenario, because we'll be loading our images from the internet, we need to use the image.network widget. This widget takes in a URL. And I've got an example of that over here. This is also in the code example that I sent you guys. Okay. So at this point, we've got our image displaying on the screen, but then we need it to be wider. So this image.network widget takes in a property called fit. And here we need to set the box fit. And we'll set that to cover, which takes up the full screen. However, though, at this point, if you click on it, you see that the material effect is not showing anymore, which is because these images are essentially opaque, they call it, because the material effect is happening behind the image. So in fact, rather than doing image.network, we need to use a special type of image, and that's where the ink.image comes into play. And then rather than specifying the URL, we just need to set the image. And then we want a network image. So we'll wrap both of these as such. So if I save this, that should, yeah, give us the material effect we want. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and add some rounded corners to this card. So in order to do that, we can set the shape of the card. And then we want a rounded rectangle border, because we're going to be rounding off the edges. This takes in an option called border radius. And then we can just specify border radius dot circular. We'll give it a number, let's say 10. However, if you look closely, you see that we're not seeing the border radius because of the image. So we need to set, all we need to do is to clip the card at the edges so that we can see the rounded corners. So we need to specify a clip behavior. Essentially, by default, it's set to none, but we want to set that to anti-alias. That way it will cut off at the edge. It will chop the image off so we can see the rounded corners. And I'll just bring this down to 5. So yeah, just as a bit subtle. Okay, so let's go ahead and add the other parts. We've got our icon for our duration. And with that, I'll create another positioned widget. I'll take in a child. And then for that child, because we need to align the clock next to the time, we're gonna use a row widget to align those next to each other. And then let's specify children for the row. So the first item in our row will be our icon. Widget. We want to specify the watch later icon. So what happens if I save this? Okay, we got that here. Let's give it a color. And let's set the text for our duration. So here we just say 120 minutes. Okay, that shows up there. Let's set some styles for it. And we'll start by giving it a color. So if I save that, that becomes white. And let's give it a font weight. So we'll make it bold. All right. Let's add some spacing between these two widgets because they're a bit too close to each other. So we'll use the sized box widget to achieve that. And the width is set to 5. And if I save that, yeah, that gives us some spacing. And lastly for that, let's set the positioning of that bit. So the left will be 18. And then the top will be 18. Okay, so last but not least, we need to look at the icon for the favorite. So to do that, let's add another positioned widget in our stack. We'll set the child of that to an icon. And this icon will be our favorite border. Okay, so we see that here. Let's also position that as well. So we want to position it 18 from the right. And then from the top, we'll do 18 as well. Okay, and then lastly, we just need to set the color of this icon. For now, we'll just set it to white. Okay. Also, lastly, because the text is white, it's very likely that there are some programs whereby we'll not be able to see the text properly because of the bright background. So in order to fix that, I'm also gonna put another widget that has a gradient on top. And I will scroll up to the bit where I am rendering my image, and directly afterwards, I can just have a container widget. This container widget takes in a decoration property. So this will allow us to decorate our container with the gradient effect. And we want a box decoration. And this box decoration takes in gradient as an option. We want a linear gradient. So it will just be a gradient that goes in just one direction from left to right. And our colors will be a list of colors. And we'll just specify we use black 54 for this example. And let's set white. And then we'll specify black 54 for this third one as well. So if I save this, let's see what that gives us. So yeah, it gives us something like this. For the gradient effect, only put white just so we can see what it looks like. But essentially what we want here is, rather than white, we want transparent for the gradient color. Okay, so it looks like that. It starts from black and then it fades into transparent, and then the same happens here as well. So at least it makes the duration, program title, and the favorites icon a bit more visible. Okay, are there any questions at this point, or should I go ahead? Okay, probably not. All right, so in this stateful widget, now if we look closely, we can see that there's a huge widget tree in here, which makes it a bit difficult to read. So what we're going to do is we'll move this card widget into a separate widget, and then import that in here. And also just to confirm that the material ripple effect still works. Okay, cool. Okay, so let's move this card widget into another one. But before we move it, I'll go ahead and create that widget. So this widget is called program card. And this extends the stateless widget. And we're making it stateless because we want the state of this to be controlled by my homepage state. Okay. Program card takes in a build method. And in here, we just want to return. And then we'll go ahead and copy all of these for our card. So from here to here, I'll cut that out. And then I'll paste that here. If I save this, we're not going to see anything. And then in here, we can just declare our widget as such. And that should come back now. Okay. So I guess the last thing we need to do is to handle the toggling of the state with this one. So I'm going to do a couple of things. I will go ahead and, well, before I go ahead, we need a way to retrieve the state of this icon. And as I mentioned, we are controlling the state here. So the idea is we can set our state in here and then pass it down to our card, which in turn will use that to set this icon as red. So I'll start at the top here under our state class. I'll create a new state property. I'll call it its favorite. I'll give it a default value of false. And then what we want to do is we're going to pass that in here. So to do that, I will define a constructor function for program card. and we're only defining it. We're only defining a constructor in order to receive property. This constructor would take in the is favorite option. So we'll say this dot is favorite. And then we need to go ahead and define that is favorite field on our stateless widget. So essentially we're going to pass that in here and it will be assigned to this by default. And what we need to do with this is if we scroll down to our favorite icon widget, we can have logic along the lines of this. So we'll check if its favorite is set to true, then we want to render the favorite icon, or else we'll use that one. And it's the American spelling. I keep forgetting that. Also, we need to do the same for the color. So if it's favorite, then we'll set the color to be red, or else the colors will be set to white. So just to test this out briefly, if we set is favorite over here, and then we set this to true, that now makes that red. And if you set it to false, it should hopefully revert. Okay, I may need to restart my app. Hold on. Okay. All right. I'm going to do another thing here. Now that we've got the state property passing down to our program card widget, we need a way to trigger the toggling of this. So in order to do that, I'll define another field here. I'll call it Untapped. And then this will be a function here. So the type is void callback. And then we'll just call this Untapped. So void callback is shorthand for a function that doesn't return anything. So in fact, I can do that as well. It's pretty much the same thing. But I'll just use void callback. And if we go down to our inkwell widget, for the Untap argument, we just need to change this to have our Untap function. Which means that I'm able to come back here and then we can define we can handle our Untap here. So the idea is that in here we'll call set state and we'll use that to update the is favorite value, which will toggle this icon. So to do that, I'm gonna scroll up into my state class. And I'll define a method called update favorite. in this method, we'll call the setState function. And in here, we'll set its favorite equal true. So I'll save this. And then I will copy this method and I will place that in here. So this means that if I click on the program card, we should be able to go ahead and invoke this method, which will update our favorite status. So let's see that. Okay, here we go. And I'm going to do something just briefly. So to help with the way these properties are defined, in Dart, we've got positional properties, positional arguments. So these are parameters that are defined in a certain position, but also we've got named arguments, which involves wrapping these two in curly brackets, like that. So this would mean that in order to use that, we need to reference it by name, here like that. And then over here, can do that for our Untapped function. So depending on how your code base is like, this is a bit more legible. At least we know what each property is and what it does based on the name here. Also, if you look closely at the widgets that we're declaring by Flutter, behind the scenes is literally just using these named parameter feature, which allows us to specify the children, the child, and the body, and so on and so forth. So let me save this. And it should still be good. I'll come up briefly and let's just set it to that so that we can toggle between the two. So if I click that, yeah, you should be able to toggle between the two now. Okay. So this pretty much ends the first part of building this app as far as the skeleton goes. Is there any question before I move on to the next section?
So guys, I've just pasted the gist for this. So the full version of what Jermaine has just coded out has just been pasted in the chat. So if you guys want to click on that link, if you couldn't follow, if you didn't manage to keep up with Jermaine because he was typing a bit fast there, you can click on that link. You can, that's the gist there. You can copy that code into your main.dart and then run it.
Jason, it's not visible in the chat.
I pasted the link to the docs URL. Is that not? Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I've just pasted it again. You should have it.
Cool. All right. So I'm gonna continue, and before we.
So Jermaine, that was that was good there, Jermaine. So do you want to just, before you go on to the next section, do you want to just sort of recap? So recap all the steps that you did basically. So you created your scaffolding, yeah. You created your card object, then you moved all of that out into your stateless class, yeah. Yeah. And they lifted the state up. You put. Do you want to just talk through all of that? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So most of this bit is all auto-generated. So what we did was we cleaned up the example. We kept it scaffold with the app bar and the title. We started by creating the counter widget. So this bit at the side, it consisted of creating a row with each of our items in the row so that they are all aligned along the x-axis. With the body, we kept the center widget, which basically positions any widget you give it in the center. But in this case, we just used a list view, which allows us to put items in a list that becomes scrollable. We went ahead and worked on building the card as well as the behavior surrounding that card. So this card is a material widget, material design based card, which also allows us to give it the ripple effect, which is caused by this inkwell widget. And this also allows us to take in, it also accepts tap events from the user. And then the actual design of this card consists of a container with a constrained height of 200. We said that in order to position these items in the same sort of spot, we needed to align them on the z-axis. So we use a stack to enable us to do that. And then the children consisted of our image, which in this case is fetched from the internet. We created a container to add our gradient effect, so the text in front of it is more visible. We set a position widget to position our program title. We set another position widget to display our duration. And then lastly, we set another position widget, which is for rendering our favorite icon. Now we made this voice display conditional based on its favorite state property, which is passed down from the parent widget that this has been placed inside, which is my homepage, so specifically in the state. And then we've got that declared here. I spoke briefly about named parameters as a means of improving the documentation in our code. So at least we know what this is referring to, or at least with this one as well. And yeah, that's pretty much what we've built so far. So if you look at the solution that Jason sent across, this is pretty much what we've got together. Okay, so if we're good, I'm gonna switch back to the slides now. And then we'll talk a bit more.